This is our second community workshop on climate adaptation planning and town resilience. Last night we had a conversation in the flood zone that focused on sea level rise and flooding, and today, here tonight, we're going to talk broadly about climate adaptation planning and why it's important to have a long-term vision for preparing the town for the future. And we're going to focus, and as most of you have heard, on how that might impact our hillside neighborhoods. So welcome again, thanks for coming. I appreciate you taking time out of your evenings. I wanted to give a little background on this program. About a year and a half ago, the town embarked on a climate adaptation grant application that comes from the state of California, Caltrans Department of Transportation, and it comes from the SB1. If you recall, when they raised the fuel tax by 12 cents, and I think the diesel tax by 18 cents, that generated a lot of money for infrastructure, but also for planning. And we applied for that money, and we received a grant from Caltrans for about $200,000, and the council, in my opinion, in its wisdom, decided to put in a big match using local sales tax money for the most part, about $175,000. So that gave us a $375,000 pot to do a lot of analysis, a really comprehensive look at all of the risk and vulnerability that the town has, and develop the town's first climate adaptation plan. In fact, it's probably one of the first in the whole Bay Area. There's not a lot of cities that have taken this on. We're at the forefront of that, and I think that's something that you all should be proud of. There's a lot of cities that are looking at sea level rise in particular, or perhaps wildfire risk abatement. But this is what we hope for this plan is that it's a comprehensive look at how we should develop policies and programs, investment strategies, and of course, infrastructure. So as a public works person, for me, one of the things I'm most excited about is what the plan might recommend for how we invest in infrastructure in the next 5, 10, 20 years or so, because I believe that will be really critical to our future quality of life. So I don't want to take a lot of your time. I just wanted to welcome you and tell you I'm really happy to be here. It's a really exciting place to live and work. And I want to turn it over to our consultant team. Maybe I can just have you all raise your hand. Sasha Peterson from Adaptation International, he's our primary lead. Magnus Barber from Nelson Nygaard, our transportation specialist, and Mindy Craig from Blue Point, who really helps us do well on outreach and communication. So they're going to lead you through, and then we're going to have a little moment at the end. We're all going to kind of bounce ideas off each other. Early on, we're going to hear from Ruben Marshall, Ruben Martin, who happens to have the title of Fire Marshal. But I'll turn it over to Mindy and just thank you again for coming. It's nice to see you all.
All right, thanks everyone. Good evening. Thanks for coming out. We're a pretty small group, so I think what would be really nice is maybe just quickly run through the room and just say your name. And let me know if you live in the hillside or the flood zone, just so we can kind of know that. That helps us in our sort of evaluation, or if you don't know, we'll try to tell you. So let's start right here, and then we'll just go to the back and up here.
John Howard, flood zone.
Lee Howard, flood. And proud of it.
Jim Andrews,
In between.
5 or 6 blocks that is not in the floodplain or
All right, so that's where the evacuation zone.
Eli Beckman, flood zone.
Jack Webster, I'm also in the sweet spot behind the hill over there.
All right, great.
Ruben Martin, Fire Marshal, and I come vote.
All right, good.
David Bell, flood zone.
Dale Wheeler, Hillside.
Cindy Miller, Hillside.
Donald Brown, Hillside.
Peggy Bernhardt, Hillside.
Andrews Christensen, flood zone.
Yetta Christensen, flood zone. Laura Richards, Upper Chapman.
Bill Rostenberg, Hillside.
Freeman, flood zone. Mary Warner, Upper Chapman, Hillside.
Great. You met Sasha.
Sasha Peterson, wish I could live here.
Joe County, Hidden Valley, Hillside.
Great.
Jim Kelly, Hillside.
David Kuhnhart, elevation 240 on the hill.
All right, great, thank you. So tonight, so we did a workshop last night generally focusing on the flooding. Tonight is sort of generally focusing on the hillside. We do have a number of folks who are in the flooding, so we might actually be able to have a conversation on that if that's what you want. We can, when we get to that point, we can discuss that. But most of tonight will be for your opportunity to talk and not listen to us. But we do want to give you some initial backdrops of what we're doing, why we're doing it. Okay, and then we're going to go and do a little breakout groups after we have this initial presentation and discussion. But I want to start a little off agenda here. Oh, actually, let me also tell you a couple things. Is that you could have picked up one of these as a comment card. So if there's thoughts, ideas that you either don't want to express or don't have time to express today, please fill these out and let us know, and we'll add that into our mix. There's also a handout, which is like a Hillside fact sheet. If you didn't get that, we can get you some more of those. We have some shoreline ones. There's only one copy back there, so if anyone needs that, let us know, we can get you that. We also have a website. Up there, it's Corte Madera Adaptation.org. So all of this information will be on there, so if you don't want to carry a bunch of paper or you want to just find out more, that's always going to be there. But I'm going to go off agenda here for just a moment so we can respect the time of Ruben Martin and let him come up and speak right now for us, because I think that's a good place to start.
Go for it. Do you want those other graphics?
Sure, if you want. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for Peter for having me here this evening. And part of it, he wanted me to talk about what we should foresee in the future with climate change.
What was the secret, committee? What was the secret?
Hold it low.
Maybe it's just, maybe it's a bit better.
Hello.
Okay, a little better. Wanted to kind of discuss
Loudly without the microphone.
Okay. Try to discuss a few things that we may anticipate with climate change moving forward with the effects of wildland fires. So as you know, for the last, since about 2013, we've been seeing an uptick in what significant catastrophic fires that in the fire service we call mega fires. So it all started in 2013, as you can remember, as the Rim Fire in, I believe it was Yosemite Valley, not Yosemite, but Lake Tahoe area. Burned approximately 402 square miles. Back when that happened, we kind of anticipated, okay, maybe this is a one-off. One of those 1 in 50-year fires, 1 in 100-year fires. Little did we know that that was kind of the beginning cycle of these big mega fires that we're seeing here in California. Since then, we've had the Thomas Fire, the Tubbs Fire, the Nuns Fire, the Mendocino Complex Fire. We've had the Camp Fire, and several other fires down the road in Southern California as well. All have been driven by these unforeseen wind events. So when you start talking about 70, 80 mile an hour driven fires caused by climate change through these significant wind changes. And so what we're seeing now is what we originally thought were these mega catastrophic fires are starting to become what we call the new normal. And I don't like to use that term too often, but unfortunately that's what it's becoming. It's our new normal. One of these mega fires, you would be able, maybe as the fire service used to see it once in your career. So you used to go maybe to a big 200,000 acre vegetation fire and come back and you go, well, I just saw my career fire, I'm good the rest of my 30 years. And so every person in the fire service had at least one career fire. My nephew, who started in Marin County Fire Department right around 2013, 2014, has seen more career fires in his 5 years as a firefighter than I have in my 25, 30 years. So we can see that these fires are starting to become more and more catastrophic. For one is we're starting to have these prolonged droughts going through California. And with those droughts, it puts a lot of strain on the vegetation that's around it. From there, we have maybe 1 or 2 years of good rain, which now causes these grasses to grow, which are your fine fuels. And so that's where your fires are starting. They're starting on your grasses and they're burning up into the hillsides. So what does that mean for us here in Corte Madera? I would anticipate seeing an uptick in fire activity, both locally, countywide,
and statewide in Northern California. And talking with some of the gentlemen earlier today regarding history in the area, I went back and looked at how much fire history has actually been in the area of Marin. And believe it or not, fires have always been in Marin long before we were here, before the Europeans colonized the Californias. Native Americans used fire, lived with fire, but back then, civilization and colonies and tribes were all pretty scarce throughout California. So there was room for things to burn. Looking at the history, especially here in Corte Madera, we had a fire in, I know everyone kind of thinks about the 1929 Mill Valley fire as the big one in Marin, but we had one here, let's see, it was in 1881 in September. Started at the William Pixley Ranch and actually burned to the slopes of Mount Town on one of those. We had another major fire in October of 1890 that burned from San Rafael all the way to Bolinas. So we've had these major fires. Back then, you maybe only lost maybe 30 structures. Why? Because maybe that was all there was from here to the coast, was 30 structures. I think the last big one that happened here in Corte Madera was 1947, and it burned approximately 300 acres. Can't tell you, I couldn't find any records of how many homes were destroyed, but looking at the footprints of what it looked like in the 40s to where we had a big boom in civilization or housing, which was, I believe, in the 60s and 70s here in Corte Madera. In the 40s and 50s, we had people just coming back from the war, so it really wasn't all that developed out. A lot of it was still ranch land, farmland, where we had a lot of room for vegetation to burn off and not really impact the citizens that lived in Corte Madera. Now you look at where those same footprints are, and as you look at Christmas Tree Hill, you look at Chapman Park, Palm Hill, going up into Madrone Canyon, this whole area here, this whole bowl has now become densely populated. And now that comes the term that we use, that wildland-urban interface or intermix. Basically is where we start moving homes out into farther and farther into the community. So how does that impact us as the fire service and you as residents? For one is it makes it more difficult for firefighters to put the fires out in between all of these homes. Why? And one of the tools that we have available to us is a lot of times, you've heard the term, we fight fire with fire. So we can basically eliminate a lot of the fuel in front of the head of the fire by actually just burning it off. Because if an oncoming fire is moving forward, it has nowhere to go if there's no fuel for it to burn. So it usually goes to these backfires and burn out. Now where you have all these communities intermixed, you can't put fire on the ground to be able to effectively put fire out. So that's off the table. Our second mode of removing fire is by creating fire breaks, which usually involves bulldozers. Well, as you can see within our built-out community, you can't be trampling a bulldozer through people's property. You're just not going to happen unless you knock people's homes down. So that just kind of leaves us to getting fire engines up there and putting water on it, which makes it more and more difficult, as you can see with our tight roadways. These hillsides were originally built out about 900 square foot vacation cabins for people who lived in the city. Those 800 square foot vacation cabins now turned into 4,000 square foot, 3-story, single family dwellings, right up to the edge of the roadway, with no space in between side to side from house to house. So that's where the challenge is going to come in moving forward, that if we do get a fire in the hillsides, is try to extinguish it as quickly as it possibly can before it gets into that first home, and then from one home to the second home to the second home and to the third home. That's what we saw in Santa Rosa. It was, I know everyone talks about Coffee Park. Coffee Park to me still baffles me on why it burned. It was an urban fire that was started by embers from a wildland fire. So at that point, it was no longer a wildland fire. It was an urban conflagration. Kind of wrap around in your brain to kind of visualize it is imagine a fire up on Chapman Park and then having down over on the east side of the bay side of Corte Madera burn. To me, that just, I can't fathom it as a firefighter, fighting fires for 30 years. It just makes no sense to me whatsoever. But it happened. So what do we do to make our homes safer? Moving forward is we're looking at, since 2008 till now, the building codes have always been updated to try to improve the exterior wildfire ignition components of a building. So what does that mean? It's what are we building our houses out of? Are we building them out of more fire-resistant materials, or are we still using shake shingles? So we tend to move towards better building standards just from lessons learned from each and every fire that's happened. So we're looking at better building conditions, strengthening our vegetation management laws and defensible space requirements, both here locally, regionally at the county level, and then also at the state level. So all those changes are happening. I know a lot of you guys have received a lot of the letters we've sent out so far, and requiring you to remove a lot of your vegetation. That's probably the only thing we can do as homeowners to try to reduce our risk, is by removing some of that fuel. And when we say fuel, it's looking at anything that's dying, dry, or dead, that you can just picture that would be kindling. If an ember landed somewhere on your property, what we're trying to do is remove the kindling. So for you as homeowners, the best thing you can do to prepare yourself for the future is try to keep your property as lean and clean as possible.
All right, here's what just wanted to. Ruben's a wealth of knowledge, and he can probably talk with us for hours. But what I want to do is just take one or two quick questions for Ruben. He actually has a fire council meeting he's going to go to. He's going to shoot over there. And then I wanted to kind of take it back to our program. Anything, Jack? Do you have a question?
Yeah. What can existing homeowners do to their actual structure to make it more fire resistant? Like closing eaves, maybe changing out the roof, a new kind of siding?
Yeah, so the question was, what can you do as a homeowner to improve the ignitability of the home, or to reduce its ignitability? Some of the things you can do, some of the low-hanging, small investment things you can do that I believe have a big, huge return on it is look at your attic space and crawl space vents. Most of the homes that were built, the era of the existing homes, all come with either 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch mesh. We're still realizing, or we're learning through since 2008 from now, when these new codes came out, is we're still getting embers getting into your crawl space or into your attic spaces. So if you can get it to a vent size that's 1/8 of an inch or smaller, that's highly recommended. There's a company out there that puts out a product called Vulcan Vent that actually has an intumescent honeycomb paint in the middle of it that will actually swell when it's heated up to about 700 degrees. So that's one thing. Another thing is evaluate what type of siding do you have. Do you have shake shingle siding, wood shingle siding? Do you have a hardy plank siding? Do you have wood siding? The next time you decide to maybe do some repairs or investment on the outside of your property, look at going to some type of cementitious board, like a hardy board siding is one. Take a look at what kind of roof material you have. And if you've got still shake shingle, which there are a few still out there, you're going to want to replace it with a comp shingle roof, which is your asphalt shingle roof. So those are some minor things you can look at. The codes today, if a home is built, HAL has to meet WUI requirements, which is meet the latest and greatest standards for fire resistance.
All right, I see one more. We'll do 2 questions, and then we're going to wrap up with Ruben.
Can you mix hardy back and wood?
Yes, we can. So hardy board, since the beginning.
Yes was the answer, Ruben. Yes.
Yeah. So the product's gotten so much better that it's harder to tell whether it's wood or not wood.
You mentioned a letter to residents to reduce fuel load. Was that sent to everyone? Because some got it, some didn't, or did everyone get it in your district?
Hillside.
So we sent out 4,000 letters to every parcel within the wildland urban interface. So basically, if you're within a Hillside community, you received one or should have received one, and we also mailed them to anywhere that had a P.O. box, or if it was, we potentially thought it was an absentee landowner, they received a letter as well. We did receive several back from the post office on areas where they couldn't forward it. So if you live in a Hillside community and didn't receive one, that's probably what happened.
David lives next to water. I'll share mine with you.
Okay, so if you're by water, I think you'll be okay when it comes to wildland fires.
Yeah, but I have the trees that are on your list.
Okay.
All right, so we haven't always had a fire marshal. It's kind of a new thing for Corte Madera, and we're so glad to have Ruben here. Maybe we just give him a round of applause and thank him for coming. If you have any issues or complaints, please email him directly. Okay, we're going to go a little bit back. I'm going to hand it over to Mindy, but thanks so much for coming, Ruben. The one thing I kind of wanted to bring home, because this is a long-range plan, right, and it's climate change, in my opinion, is a real thing, and so when I think about the models for California's climate, they really do talk about a couple of major things. One is more prolonged drought. We had a 5-year drought that you all are very familiar with that led to a lot of the big wildfires we had the last couple seasons. We are apt to have more long-term droughts in the next 50 to 100 years in California. We are also apt to see much more precipitation come down as rain as opposed to snow. And so that also tends to lead to less storage and less runoff of water and less water availability in the state. And so those things really impact our long-term thought processes and vulnerabilities to things like wildfires. But I want to turn it back to Mindy, and she's going to walk us through some questions that we all need help from you on.
Okay, thanks, Peter. So I think that was a great introduction from the Fire Marshal about sort of what's to come and the concerns. I live in the Oakland Hills, and Oakland Hills fire is still burned in my mind, literally. And I was up in your hillsides, and it was very similar to what we are. So it's an important thing to think about. But we're also here to talk about resilience, because we're in a position, thanks to the grants and to the forward thinking of the town, to think about how can we protect, prevent, mitigate as much of this effort, of the damages from fires, floods, rain as possible. And so that's what we're really here tonight to think about and to look forward to a long-range plan that gets us there. And I just wanted to bring up this picture. So this is Paradise. And the thing that's interesting here is there's a house that survived. And all of us think, yeah, that's what I'm thinking about right now. I want my house to survive. I want my family to be well. That's what I'm thinking about. Well, folks are now moving back into Paradise, and what they're realizing is not only are they living in a catastrophe zone, they have no water because all the piping has been corroded and corrupted by the fires. So there's plastics and all this nasty stuff, so they can't drink any of the water. Because they're trying to be good to the residents who lost their homes, they've given forgiveness for all the property taxes, and so they don't have any funds in their coffers to help rebuild. And so I bring this up because I want us to also not only just to think about ourselves tonight, but think about what it means to be resilient as a town. What does it mean to actually be resilient together? Because this, in many ways, is not resilience. While the house survived, is this really how we want to live? And so I think that's an important thing because there's a lot of underpinning, all the transportation networks, which we'll be talking about, the parks, the recreation, the wonderful paths through all the hillsides. How do all this interconnected thread us together as a community, not to mention all the social elements that we want to do. So I just want to have us in that mindset that we're thinking about ourselves because that's all what we do. We always do that. But also to recognize that part of our self-interest is an interest around us. So I know some of you were here last night, and you might have had the opportunity to think about this, but I wanted to kind of get your sense here of what resilience means to you. What does it mean to the town of Corte Madera? So we can just take hands, and maybe Sasha, you can help me here and move the mic around as people want to mention this, and I'll write it up on here. And it'll be just, again, touchstones as we go through this process to think about our goals of where we want to go to in terms of resilience. So, some first hands?
Or maybe let's do a friendly amendment. Let's take 2 minutes, talk to your neighbors at the table, and just come up with an idea of what does resilience mean for your table, and then we'll share from the table perspective.
All right. Get close.
Lean in. 2 minutes. All right, this is the only conversation we'll have tonight, so thanks for jumping in and chatting with your table. Anybody having some conversation or piece that came out of your conversation, like what does resilience mean to your table?
You want to go first? So
You get to go first.
I'm sure somebody else is going to say the same thing. But Kelly's here, very clear. Having a couple of things. Clearer rules from the town about, let's say, the nature of law over what you can do about your neighbor's trees that are coming over your property, what you need to do about your trees that are going over your neighbor's property. So more clarity in what are the rules, and more clarity in what role the town will take on those rules. But more important than that is a sense of cohesion and collaboration, getting going with more motivation for group preventive action is what they were focused on.
That's awesome. Thank you. Another table.
Jack here used a good phrase, the phrase comforts of life, regaining the comforts of life after some sort of disaster. So I think that really sums it up well.
Yeah, I've heard it also called bouncing back, but I like that. It makes it more personal and like regaining your comfort, back into your zone. Yes?
This may be a little prior to resilience, but we felt that we should know where to evacuate to.
And you don't feel like you know that?
No, I don't yet.
Okay, so knowing where to go, like kind of having a plan to deal with the situation. All right, a couple more tables on the thoughts, yeah.
So I think the idea here was to have the capacity as a town to recover, to retain the financial capacity so that we can rebuild.
So capacity financially and structurally to rebuild. All right, anything that wasn't said? Yeah.
Come on, Henry.
Based on what David was saying over here with resilience, but there's also an incentive for the community to help each other clear brush that's coming over one's fence for property. Anything else?
Great. All right, one table. We don't want you to feel left out.
Well, I said it, didn't necessarily agree, but I thought that we should have good infrastructure. If you don't have good infrastructure, like she was saying, the plastic pipes that melted and, things like that, if we could have better siding or whatever, then we've got a good start.
No, those are all really good thoughts, and one more addition.
I want to say that achieving resilience, I really think, is about reframing the issues that we've lived with. People say to us, but I'm attached to my juniper. I'm attached to my juniper. And I think we need to begin to reframe which lines the street, so that it lines our exit route. So I think we need to begin to reframe this as which is more important for you, your juniper or your house, because the answer both is no longer possible in this high-risk neighborhood that we live in. And if you choose your juniper, you and the rest of us are in trouble. So I think reframing some of these issues to really think about it in a different way is important.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, that's all a really good point. So heard a lot of themes, planning, being prepared, taking action now so that you're prepared for the future, building this cohesion so that neighborhoods are working together, or the community as a whole is working together, and so that you can bounce back and regain your quality of life. But in some contexts, I've also been thinking about it as not just bouncing back, but bouncing forward, right? So if something were to happen, how do you leverage the investment that the town is making to enhance the community as a whole? Like, how do we think about those co-benefits? Like, can we invest in clearing brush, but also making more trails accessible and things like that. So how do we think about the positive aspects of building resilience? So climate change is all doom and gloom most of the time, but what are the opportunities that come with making these investments to enhance our community?
Yeah, I don't want to miss this idea of the reframing, and I think, you know, and Sasha's going to go through this in a second, sort of this process that we're going to go through for the plan, but this is hopefully an opportunity for you as a community to get that reframing, and it might take a while, and to share this with your neighbors and to have these conversations is going to be helpful, because there are going to be things, like you said, we're going to have some judgments about what we can or can't do, and how do we do that in a way that is both generous to one another and generous to ourselves and to our community, so that we end up, as Sasha's saying, in a very positive place. So I think that's a really important thing for us to think as a meta concept. So that's great. So you ready to take over?
Well, we're going to get a chance to have more discussions, and really we're going to have we'll continue the discussions at your table. I just want to put in a few more building blocks or pieces for you to think about at your table as we have these discussions about, you know, how do we move towards being a more resilient community. You've already lived through these fires. You know that it's a real risk for the communities. The shoreline parts of the community have lived through king tides and know that flooding happens every year. And with climate change, these things are likely to get worse. The risk is going to be increased. Luckily, the town is in a great spot, as Peter was saying. Like, we're pivoting from, you know, doing assessments to taking action. And it's really a cool point in history to be able to be crafting that next step that you want to take together. When you think about, you know, climate and weather, this is just a schematic. It's not representing actual temperature or precipitation changes. But you can see, if you look across time, it goes from the left to the right here. This average, you know, this is what we experience as climate. This is the last, you know, 20 years here, how much it's rained overall, how much rain you get a year over the course of those 20 years. You can see here, maybe if this was representing rainfall, you know, there's the drought, and that affects your wildfire risk. If these were temperature variations, then there's low temperatures, there's high temperatures. That's all, you know, that's what we experience. As climate changes, the way that we experience it is going to change as well. So what used to be the norm, as Ruben was saying, is not the current condition. So we're moving into a new normal type of situations. But there'll still be hot days and cold days. There'll still be wet years and dry years. Like, all that is not going to change. But this trend is going to continue. And we need to, as we think about moving into the future, prepare for where this trend is going. And we also, what the models and the scientists are telling us is that the amplitude is changing. So there's going to be higher highs and lower lows. There's going to be extreme atmospheric rivers that dump water like they did in February here and, you know, overwhelm the streets for a little while. And then there'll also be those longer periods of drought. So we need to think about that too as we do our preparedness work. So it's framing it in that sense helps me think about where we're headed. The other way I like to think about it is the way that a friend of mine, Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, talked about it, is that, you know, almost all of our social and human constructs were based on this idea at the beginning that our climate is stable, it's flat. So there's ups and downs. We designed our water system so that it, based on snowpack, gathers precipitation in the winter and snowpack, and we can use it over the course of the year. We assume there's ups and downs, but it's totally stable. But that assumption is no longer valid. So if you're thinking about it like driving a car, if it was stable, we could look in the rearview mirror and we can drive our car down the road just looking in the rearview mirror because the road is straight. And that works a lot of the time, but so it might work on 101 as you're headed south until you have to navigate a tunnel or make a turn. And so now we need to start looking forward, and that's what the town's doing with this plan, is looking forward and preparing for where we're headed, not just where we've been. And the other point to make in that is, if we think about our hillside communities, the fact that there's changing climate conditions, there's drought, as Ruben was saying, there's always been wildfire, there will still be wildfire. The problem is that we as humans put our houses in the middle of the forest. And now we have to deal with that and reduce those risks and be prepared to live with it. The plan that the town is doing is twofold, so it's values driven, so it's based on, you know, the concerns of the community. That's why you're here, to help share that and, you know, help focus planning efforts. It's also science-based, so bringing in the best available science that's available to guide the plan and help us determine where we can go. Some of that science is at the state level, the regional level, the local level. All that's going to be involved. You can see here, this is kind of the outline of the timeline for the plan. We're still in 2019, and we're laying the foundation and starting to engage around this topic of climate adaptation. And then for each of these squares here, there will be an opportunity as residents for you to be involved, either through a public meeting, or through surveys, or through talking to us, or talking to Peter, or talking to the town council members. So with each of these big chunks, we'll explore what options are available, we'll evaluate and refine those approaches, and then eventually, a crafted plan will go to the town council, and they can decide how to integrate that into the work that they're already doing. The other piece that came up last night, and maybe is just worth clarifying, is that the focus of this planning effort in the climate change space is on the adaptation piece. It's on the preparing for what's going to come and helping to build community resilience. When you're thinking about climate change as a whole, there's really kind of two sides to it. There's the reducing the greenhouse gas emissions side, and there's the preparing for the future. And using another transportation analogy for Magnus's benefit, I like to think about climate change as a train going down the tracks. So it's moving along, and this reducing the emissions piece is critical, shifting away from fossil fuels. The town's doing a lot on that side of things, but that's like slamming the brakes on the train, which is good. We need to do that, but no matter how quickly we do that, the train is still going to go down the tracks. And so the building resilience and preparing for the future is preparing for where the train is going to end up as we go down those tracks. All right, and Ruben already talked about this. The last slide I'm talking towards you will just be a couple more pieces, and then we'll let you break loose and talk some more. But Magnus, you want to talk about the transportation component of this?
And I've been told to hold the mic very close to my mouth. I was a bit quiet yesterday.
Sound good now.
Okay, good. All right, so here's a map of the various transportation infrastructure in Corte Madera. It's a bit hard to see on the screen. We also have a map over there where hopefully some of you have put pins in to show us where you live. We'll come around again later with the map, and you can put your pin in if you haven't done so already. But as we're looking at the Hillside neighborhoods, what really characterizes those neighborhoods is relatively narrow streets, 12 to 14 feet wide in places. That's quite challenging in terms of transportation, especially where there's on-street parking. It can be very difficult if you have a large truck like garbage or a fire truck meeting oncoming traffic. It can be very difficult to get through there. And there's also a range of recreational facilities up there. There's fire roads for fire access. There's also steps and lanes and trails that are available. The town, is planning to upgrade the top 5, or try to choose the top 5 trail projects to upgrade in the next 3 to 5 years, which will also be a great quality of life thing for people who are living up in the hillside. But also, if you're thinking in terms of resilience, they're going to provide an alternate route out in the event that, as Sasha said, the peaks are getting higher and lower, and with increased rainfall, there's increased likelihood of mudslides that might block a road, or a tree might block a road. And so those trails and steps provide additional access to the neighborhood.
I changed it for you.
Yeah, and so there are some examples of relatively narrow streets. So I think that's all. Oh, and so I'm going to be walking around as we do the discussion. If you have any thoughts on transportation, I'd be happy to hear those and discuss with you. Thanks. I'll pass it back to Sasha.
Thanks, Magnus. And I think one of the takeaways from the transportation piece is it's kind of it's the fabric that connects both the shoreline and the hillside communities, and it's also the infrastructure that's there when there is a disaster or there is an emergency response. capability. And so it's that transportation that kind of is part of that cohesion that brings the community together and provides opportunities as well as risk reduction benefits. There's a map here, and as Marshall Rubin was talking about, all those red dots, so if you can see here, this is kind of just initial scoping of some of the planning effort. These red and pink layers, so these are CAL FIRE's different fire hazard boundaries. And then the hashed areas, which are hard to see, are the county wildland urban interface areas, so they overlap pretty well, though not 100%. And then all these red dots are homes that are in the high severity zone. The orange is the yellow severity, and the yellow are those that are in the wildland urban interface. And those are the homes that Ruben was talking about had to meet certain building requirements if they're rebuilt or renovated or new. But you can see that's, I don't know, is it about half the town that's up there? More than?
The better half.
More than half, or?
Much less than half.
Less than half. All right. And this is a similar map with the PG&E tiers, wildfire tiers, but the same houses and obviously the similar challenges that you're all very familiar with. So about 44% are actually in the wildland urban interface, and a little more than 50% are not. So just jumping into the discussion, as you get into your discussion piece, we're going to do a couple of things. So one, we just touched on a few issues. You know, there's a lot that have been mentioned today, so vegetation management, access, neighborhood response, the ability for neighborhoods and the NRGs or CERT teams to respond if there's a big event and Ruben can't be there. How does building codes, what about insurance coverage? You know, I know there's issues with the price of insurance for homes both on the shoreline and in the hillside, and that's changing dramatically. So these are all pieces of the puzzle. So what we'd love to do is, yeah, go.
No. I have one more thing I want to say.
Please say one more thing.
Right. So I realized, as you were saying this, I realized I forgot to mention one thing earlier. So there was a question about how do I evacuate? I don't know where to go. And the team was talking to the fire marshal about that earlier today. And one of the things that characterizes the neighborhood is that a lot of the streets, there's only one way in and one way out. There's not a network. And so his suggestion was, you know, if you need to leave, drive to the supermarket. Just take the road you normally take to go to the supermarket, and that strikes me as very practical advice. Because you know the way to go, just follow that way. So that was his suggestion.
Great. Do we have those handouts for the... So what we'd love to do is just get your thoughts for 30 more minutes or so. We're going to have breakout discussions just around your table. Mary, unfortunately, you were abandoned by your colleagues, so you may have to join another table, or you can sneak out and we won't say anything. So just around your table, we'd love to get your thoughts on this worksheet. There's some prompting questions. At the end of, we're just going to take maybe 20 minutes and have a conversation. At the end of it, we'd love to hear back 2 or 3 key challenges, particularly from the hillside perspective, but if your table wants to talk about shoreline issues, you definitely can. So 2 or 3 challenges and 2 or 3 opportunities that your neighborhood or the town has to be better prepared or enhance resilience for responding to wildfire threat. Focus on the first 4 questions on there. So the first page is kind of like defining your challenges that you face at the neighborhood level, and then the first question on the back is more about the opportunities piece. So you don't have to worry about the last question.
Are these strictly focusing on fire?
You don't necessarily have to focus strictly on fire.
There's a lot of people that see that a lot.
Whatever resonates or you want to talk about as your group is going to be great. So we're going to have 4 groups. 4. Okay. I know it's hard on a Thursday night late to keep the brain power going, but I definitely heard some really good discussion at the tables that I got to listen into. Mindy's going to help us capture this, but what I'd love to hear is just from each of your discussions, 2 or 3 key concerns that came up. Like, these are the biggest issues that the town or our neighborhood is facing and we need to deal with, and we'll just capture those first. And then I know there was discussion about solutions and opportunities, so then we'll also do 2 or 3 opportunities to address those concerns or address other related issues, and we're just going to capture it up here as we go through it. Sound all right?
Yeah.
You look like you're chomping at the bit over here.
We're number 1. As it happens, Joan and Jim Kelly here are very active members of their Hidden Valley NRG, and Joan is the fire captain there. And the big concern is there's just one way out for 85 homes. So all it takes is one vehicle that is stalled, one vehicle that's burning, one vehicle that's poorly driven or something, and everybody else is trapped, if you will. There is a Karen's path that could be used for evacuation, and the town has, in the past, helped clear it. And the kids used to use that a lot, but that's really the only option. And let's see.
Is it a walking path?
Walking path.
Okay.
A brilliant idea. Can I go on to a couple of solutions that these brilliant people have put up there? One is to, and this is in ill form, but start defining fuel reduction issues as code enforcement issues, which have the power of code enforcement, so that you can't get your permission on a completion of anything unless you've taken care of the reductions of fuel around your home. Another really interesting one that I never thought of before was, hey, we've got to discourage the sale of juniper and bamboo and black acacia, which, I mean, all of the nurseries around sell these plants still to everyone. Okay, bring those businesses on board. Another is actually, as they are graduating from early NRG work into Firewise community action planning, really wanting to get street-by-street engagement of everybody. So it's their idea, their action, and not top-down. And then yet, there's a row of 8 to 10 gigantic eucalyptus, which are paraphytic, and those are very expensive, and they're going to need help doing that. So those are some of the things that are on this very experienced team's mind.
That's great. Thank you. I'm going to just go around this way if you are willing and brave back here.
When does weather go from nuisance to a problem in the neighborhood? We said that wind causes trees to fall and branches to break off, which can obstruct the streets. We have a lot of fallen trees. What are the biggest climate change concerns for the town in 20 years? We said some of them are extreme heat, pollution, and smoke.
Yeah, did you get to talking about opportunities?
Yes. Yeah. The city could do more to suggest proper trees to plant and where to plant them. Consider allowing fences instead of hedges between homes.
Wait, don't go too fast.
Oh, am I going too fast?
No, that just last one, I just want to make sure I get, instead of hedges, instead of fences, instead of hedges?
Yes. What does action now help to achieve us? How does action now help us achieve our vision of resilience? We suggested that the fire marshal could recommend vegetation removal when properties sell. If this be something that has to be done just like a sewer lateral inspection. The property be brought up to what you consider safe. Anything else you want to say about the road?
Just my initial, whether the theme on rules or recommendations for evacuation routes is that they be 20 feet wide, free and clear, which means 10 foot one way, 10 foot the other way. I'm trying to think of the roads in town that actually meet that criteria.
Not in my neighborhood.
Not in your neighborhood, not mine. So it's sort of like, how should the town start thinking about evolving towards having many of its roads, or at least major access roads, being that width, and then making certain, in addition to the 20 feet, you've got 8 foot for parking, 8 foot for parking. Just thinking that way.
No, that's great. There's a couple emerging themes with the access, keeping those transportation corridors available, and then on the planting issue and real estate. I was at this national conference focused on adaptation and resilience, and Boulder County has this Wildfires Partners program where they work with homeowners to help prepare their properties. And it's actually turned into like this really big real estate selling point. Like if your home is certified as a wildfire partner property, then you can command a premium if you're selling your home. So tying it back into that, like finding ways to make it code enforceable, but then also incentivizing it by like, hey, people are paying more for these homes because they are prepared. One over here. Couple key challenges or key opportunities, something that's not up there, or add to it, whatever you want.
I think we would just support some of the things that have been said, but anything that can be done to create incentives on the part of the town to support neighbors removing fuel loads, removing brush that hampers evacuation. We talked a lot about evacuation from here, and in our situation, we have a canopy of trees. And we can just do so much. We really need town support and town funding to help eliminate some of the major growth that is impeding our evacuation.
I want to ask a question on that because I know that in Santa Barbara and in Berkeley and there's other places in kind of a similar scenario, they've actually done sort of fire districts as a tax, and it's the community, they use that fund to actually, in some places, getting goats to do hillsides and take down vegetation. It's to do removal of that, it's to help with the roads. Is that something that should even be considered here?
Priority to get a sales tax override. We set aside $1,000 this year.
Hold on, who is it? Get you a...
Next year.
Sorry, say that one more time. Start from the beginning.
When we passed the sales tax override, in addition to paying for all sorts of capital equipment, we did specify that the money can be used for fire mitigation, trying to fire everything down. I believe currently we've got $300,000 set aside. We can put in, we're coming up with a new budget, so we're going to put more money in there. So it's there. But if you've got a specific sort of problem, send a letter to the town council. Send it to Todd.
Send it to Peter.
Send it to Peter too.
Well, let me ask a question on this. So, is this a one-time possibility? Because I think one of the things, if we look about this, is a long-term solution. So in 15 years,
every year,
there's an available pot. Okay, so that's important. So so we have to create the system around it rather than you just calling. But how do we create a system?
Right now, we're in the process of trying to. We're sort of prototyping chipper, neighborhood chipper things.
Gotcha.
If it works, we're going to sort of institutionalize it. And I believe we've done it. One or two. Okay. And so then starting up on those hills, as soon as somebody can figure out how to get up on Christmas Tree Hill, do it there, right? So
We do chippers on Christmas Tree Hill.
What?
Once a year we have a chipper day. In my neighborhood on Christmas Street.
all right. So, but we're going to sort of try and make it more institutionalized.
Okay. Sorry, Jeff, and then I'll come back to you.
Just on that subject, if you've been reading the papers lately, the fire chiefs in the county are trying to come together, and they're talking about a taxable district to coordinate all the
County-wide?
County-wide on, reducing the risk there. So it might be something that could get coordinated with the cities.
Yeah. Well, and I also heard that come up that it is a region-wide issue. It's only so much the town can do on its own, and it's got to be some of these partnerships and collaborations and looking across jurisdictions.
I'll just add to what you're saying about it being regional, is even within the town, sometimes one gets the sense that the different components of the town aren't working together, and that there's some competition among different players in the town. So if there's a way that politics could kind of work itself out so that all members of the town could focus in on some of these resiliency issues, and in our situation, it's particularly fire. So we really, I think there's some money there, but it's hard to know who's got it and how it's getting used, and it seems like there's a lot of complicated interactions. So I feel like we need cooperation within the town leadership. We also need cooperation between our town leadership and all the surrounding towns and the state park and the county parks. I mean, we need coordination to tackle some of these situations. And we also need individual residents to step up, but there's just so much that we can do.
Are you willing to be a little more forthcoming on what the problem is? You got 3 members of the town council and the director of public works.
You know what, I can't be specific because I just hear it from individuals. So I can't name names or be more specific, but I do hear that there's competition.
Well, and you might, I think the bigger point perhaps, again, thinking about not today necessarily, but as the town we want is, this idea that everyone has a role in resilience, and so creating that culture. So it's not necessarily between somebody today, although that should be addressed, but thinking about it as the long-term concept is, hey, we have to be together on this and work together. And I think that's...
I agree. That's all I'm asking for. It's just a collaborative spirit with a common goal.
Did you finish all your report out? Did you get your opportunities in? Got more?
That'll contribute to that. Also at this table, puts down things to vote up was, even though I'm not in the fire country, she had a lead, but the NRG group is very well developed and they do evacuation drills, and they put in their own implementation of it. Every family should have 2 evacuation routes, and one of them is by walking. And I think the point is they found that the paths that they want to use to evacuate are overgrown and they're on public or city property. I think that's the point, to have town help. And also at this table, there's a sense of urgency. And I think this comment with last night is that there could be a fire tomorrow or next week or next year, and it's nice to have this talk, but there's a sense of urgency.
Peter, do you want to mention step lanes and paths effort you're going to do, just to address that one point?
We've had this item a couple of times at our bicycle district advisory committee, including the last month that we met. But we have been working with them to kind of prioritize, maybe they have 6, a list of top 6 steps, lanes, and paths that we want to begin doing. First of all, vegetation management, which I think we've done a little bit of. I think Councilor Kuhnhart saw that we've done some work up there with the public works staff. But then also we need to do some restoration, right? We have trees that are uplifting old steps that need to be restored. If you've been to the valleys and steps in the past, you'll see the great restoration work that they did there. We agree it's a priority. It needs to happen sooner than later. And so, part of my role is to ensure that the infrastructure investments are spread equitably around town. So that's something that I've been advocating for. And then the other thing I I don't know who you've been talking to, but I'm happy to talk to them as well.
Thanks, Peter. I don't want to leave this table out, so challenges and opportunities that came up for...
All right, so for the concerns, we kind of went more towards covering the basics. So we got drought, and then flooding as a result of deluge, and also flooding as a result of sea level rise. And we also, with nuisances, we talked a lot about wind, whether it's wind spreading embers or spreading debris or clogging storm drains. A lot of different ways that strong winds, which we tend to have in town, can go from being a nuisance to a problem. Opportunities, we were talking about the opportunity for more community engagement, education, exactly what we're doing right now. This is fantastic, community planning. Speaking to your point, inter-community collaboration, that's really critical. I mean, these are huge, these are, bigger than regional problems, and if we're all got our sort of heads stuck at the narrow sort of town level, we're not going to be able to really effectively respond to them. The last thing we discussed was the opportunity to turn new disaster preparedness infrastructure into a public amenity. So for example, if you build a levee, you can put a bike path or a park on top of it. Maybe there's a way to sort of replace more flammable species of vegetation throughout town with native species and turn that into sort of a nice vegetated feature. So different opportunities there that we were discussing.
All right, anything else of that conversation jogged in your memory or hasn't been covered that you want to get up on the board?
My colleague and I worked with Ruben about priorities for us in terms of Hidden Valley neighborhood, and I think that the way the funding's coming, and so it's pretty opaque to those of us who are not involved. One of the things that he said was that, probably the first money's going to go to Christmas tree. And because of the urgency of those narrow roads and so on, well, hearing that, it's like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. But it'd be good, that that's priority then more than our neighborhood, for example. It would be good to have some transparency about the planning, I think, for how's the money going to be used. And secondly, for those of us that don't get enough or any grant money, what kind of help can there be to do some collaborative grant proposals to get it elsewhere? Because there are places to get funding for fuel reduction, but it's pretty daunting to begin to figure out where you go to find that. I mean, it's like we need a consultant, that can talk to a group of us to come together and get larger grants.
Any other opportunities that have been sparked in your brains? Talking through it. Jack, is it appropriate to mention the funding piece? I was just talking about grant funding.
Yeah.
You can mention it generally.
Yeah. There, as you said, there are funds, and Prop 68 has a lot of money in it for fire planning, and it's something that it's a regional plan. I'm assuming someone in the county or the cities has gone after that because it's no secret that it's there. But if we haven't, we should be looking at that.
We need to have some kind of list of resources, places to go.
Getting a list of resources and places, yeah. The other thing we've found in other areas is that, going through this planning process collaboratively together sets you up very well for all those grant applications. Like, hey, look, we did all this prioritization. We know what we want to do. You take that to the funding agency and say, hey, we're ready for this, and then we're going to go to this fuels management plan because it's the top of our list, sort of thing.
There's a lot of money coming out on this in California and from the federal, so this is exactly what you need to do to get there.
Well, it was really rewarding for me to get to sit in a couple tables and, get little glimpses into the wealth of expertise and knowledge that this town has. And thank you for taking some of your evening to spend it with us. This is, as we said, kind of the start of the process. So, we will have more public engagement sessions. There's at least another couple of times throughout the course of this particular project. I know there are other ways, to make your voices heard as part of the conversation, but there'll be at least a couple more so you can tell your neighbors, your energy, your other group to come and join us. There's the website, CorteMaderaAdapts.org, where, notes or will be posts, there'll be links to some of these, this conversation and the shoreline conversation on YouTube. There's also a survey coming out that we'd love your help distributing, so it should be up tomorrow at the Corte Madera Adapt's website and maybe on the town's website, but maybe not till next week. But if you can share that and broaden the circle and get input on some of these same type of questions, that would be extremely valuable. And then
Sasha, how long will the survey run for?
the survey will run to the beginning of June, so about a month. Yeah.
So I think what we'll do, there's a number of ways we want to do it. Obviously, the town has, thank you. The town has a large mailing list. We want to do that. We would like the NRGs to help us get it out. We're going to ask all of the different groups who have been involved to please send it out. We'll do it on Facebook, on the social media. The school district has a large mailing list. And so on June 1st, they sent out a list of everybody in their district. They're going to put it through that as well as several other elements. We'll also have like flyers and other things. So we're trying to get every way possible. Yeah.
Don't forget Nextdoor.
And of course, Nextdoor, we were going to try and do a press release potentially in one of these cases to the local town newspaper. So the Marin IJ did some work earlier. We're going to continue to push all those pieces as much as possible. One of the questions in the survey is how do you guys want to be known about these things? We've also asked people to put in their emails so we can continue to get you updated on this information, because I know it's hard. There's so many things. I mean, just looking at the marquee, there's many meetings that all of you, I'm sure, are interested in engaging. So we'll try and get it out as often as we can.
An issue that came up with surveys for other topics was, were the respondents in Corte Madera, or was it just somebody who went on the internet and hit our website? So is there any way you can sort of track whether it's sort of either Corte Madera or at least an ISP that services Marin or something like that, so we can get a sense for it?
We're going to ask people. That's one of the first questions is, do you live or work in Corte Madera? Or no, I'm just a visitor. So we're going to try and ask that. I think, yes, there is technology that we can trace them all. I don't think that's probably our best option. So I think we'll hope for that we can get the comments on, where do you live? And that people will be honest with that.
If we start getting a lot of hits from Antarctica, we'll not count those responses.
I think it's Albania or something like that, or it's something in the Ukraine. So, yeah, okay. Any other questions or thoughts? I just want to leave us with some of the positive things we started the meeting with, just as before we go. Oh, I think Sasha was also mentioned to make sure if you have comments to fill that out.
Leave it with us.
Yeah, leave it with us. I just want to this idea early on, we talked about reframing the issues. So we're not necessarily doing all the things we did in the past. This idea about the capacity to recover, creating prevention, going beyond bouncing back. So just as we leave in this evening, these positive elements, it's very tough sometimes to talk about these things, this sense of urgency and fear that these things are happening, but as a group, can we come together? And as I think you said in the back, is there an opportunity for us to sort of overcome our past sort of divisiveness and actually do something here? So, I don't know, Peter?
I think maybe what people want to do is go home. So we're going to wrap up. I wanted to thank the team. They're great. We love working with them. And they're going to write the plan. So these are the folks that don't just do amazing community engagement and write surveys, but they're going to write the plan. They're going to develop the graphics. We're going to send out as we move along, get your input on the draft plan. And thank you so much again for coming. Appreciate it.